The Mafia Boss was refused a table on his birthday until a single mom changed everything. Hello, my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I truly wish that happiness and good luck find you wherever you are. Before we begin, may I borrow just 5 seconds of your good fortune? If you enjoy heartfelt stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable journey. Thank you so much for your continued support and for being part of this amazing community. I would love to know where you're watching from today and what time it is in your part of the world. So leave a comment below and say hello. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let us begin a story that proves one simple act of kindness can change even the most powerful life forever. Sometimes the loneliest seat in the room belongs to the most powerful man. The smell of fresh bread and roasted garlic wrapped around me the moment I pushed open the front door of Romano's Family Grill, the little neighborhood restaurant where I worked every evening after dropping my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, at my mother's apartment. Friday nights were always packed. Plates clattered against wooden tables. Children laughed over baskets of fries, and conversations blended with soft jazz drifting from an old speaker near the ceiling. It was the kind of place where birthdays ended with everyone singing together, whether they knew you or not. I balanced 3 plates on one arm while apologizing to customers waiting for a table. Every booth was occupied. Every chair was taken. My feet already hurt, but overtime meant another grocery trip without worrying about my bank account. Raising Lily alone had taught me that exhaustion was cheaper than giving up. Just after 7, the front door opened again. The room grew strangely quiet for only a heartbeat before everyone returned to their own conversations. A tall man stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal coat over a simple black shirt. Dark hair brushed neatly away from his forehead, revealing calm blue eyes that noticed everything without lingering on anyone. As he removed his gloves, the sleeves shifted slightly, exposing intricate black tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. He did not look like someone trying to impress people. He looked like someone who had long ago stopped caring whether anyone approved of him. "Table for one," he said politely to our hostess. Melissa glanced at the waiting list and offered an apologetic smile. "I am so sorry, sir. We are completely full tonight. The wait is about an hour and a half." The man looked around the crowded dining room, not with frustration, not with entitlement, just quiet acceptance. "I understand," he answered. "Thank you anyway." Something about the way he said it made me stop carrying plates for just a second. Most customers argued. Some complained. Others demanded exceptions. He simply nodded and turned toward the door as though spending another birthday alone had become something familiar. Birthday? I only realized why he had come alone when I noticed a small white bakery box tucked beneath his arm, tied with a silver ribbon. There was only one candle taped to the top. One. My chest tightened in a way I could not explain. Before I had time to think, I handed my serving tray to another waitress and hurried after him. "Excuse me," I called. He stopped and looked back, surprised that anyone was speaking to him. "You can have my table." He frowned slightly. "That is very kind, but I cannot take your dinner." I smiled and shook my head. "It was my break anyway. I can eat later." He glanced toward the crowded dining room again. "And what about you?" I shrugged. "I have eaten standing up more times than I can count." For the first time, the corners of his mouth lifted into the smallest smile. It was genuine, almost uncertain, as though smiling had become a language he had not spoken in years. "May I at least know the name of the person rescuing my birthday?" he asked softly. "Grace," I answered. "Grace Mitchell." He held my gaze for one thoughtful moment before extending his hand. "Adrian." No last name. No explanation. Just Adrian. I shook his hand, unaware that half the city knew exactly who he was, and completely unaware that one empty table in a small neighborhood restaurant was about to change both of our lives forever. There is a quiet kind of loneliness that even a crowded room cannot hide. I watched Adrian disappear into the dining room, carrying the little white cake box as though it weighed much more than flour and frosting. He chose the table beside the front window, thanked me once again with a polite nod, and sat alone while families laughed around him. Balloons floated above nearby booths. Children wore paper birthday hats. Someone across the room began singing happy birthday to an elderly grandmother surrounded by 3 generations of family. Adrian simply unfolded a linen napkin and looked out at the rain tapping gently against the glass. I returned to work, telling myself I had done nothing extraordinary. I had only given up a table. Still, every few minutes my eyes drifted toward the man celebrating his birthday without anyone sitting across from him. During my break, I grabbed a cup of coffee and noticed one empty stool at the small counter near the kitchen. Adrian looked up as I walked past. "Grace," he said with a warm smile, "would you allow me to repay your kindness by buying you a slice of birthday cake?" I laughed softly. "It is your birthday. You're supposed to be the one receiving gifts." "Perhaps," he replied, "but tonight I already received one." Something about the sincerity in his voice made it difficult to refuse. I glanced toward the dining room. Another waitress gave me a reassuring thumbs up, silently telling me she could cover my tables for a few minutes. I sat across from Adrian at the narrow counter while a server placed 2 small dessert plates between us. "Do you always celebrate alone?" I asked before realizing how personal the question sounded. Instead of looking offended, he smiled faintly. "More often than people would imagine. Family out of town." He looked at the candle resting beside the unopened cake. Something like that. There was sadness in those 3 words, but no bitterness. I decided not to ask anything else. We talked about ordinary things instead. Chicago winters, the best pizza in the city, Lily's love for science books and astronomy. Adrian listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions that made me feel as though every answer mattered. When I mentioned working double shifts to save for Lily's future, he nodded with quiet admiration. She must be very proud of her mother. I smiled. I hope one day she will understand why I missed a few bedtime stories. Adrian lowered his eyes for a moment before saying, "Children usually remember love much longer than schedules." His answer caught me by surprise. It sounded like someone speaking from experience, or perhaps from regret. Just then the restaurant lights dimmed slightly as the staff gathered around another table carrying a birthday cake topped with sparkling candles. Everyone clapped and laughed together. I noticed Adrian glance toward them for only a second before looking away. Without thinking, I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out a single birthday candle left over from decorating desserts. I placed it gently into the center of his cake and borrowed a lighter from the kitchen. The tiny flame flickered between us. "Every birthday deserves at least 1 candle," I said quietly. Adrian stared at the flame for several silent seconds. No one in the restaurant noticed us. No one sang. No one applauded. Yet I had the strange feeling this simple moment meant more to him than any extravagant celebration ever could. He closed his eyes briefly before blowing out the candle. When he opened them again, his expression had softened in a way I had never seen before. "Grace," he said almost in a whisper, "you are the first person who has wished me a happy birthday in many years." Before I could answer, the front door opened and several impeccably dressed men stepped inside. The moment they noticed Adrian, every one of them straightened respectfully, and the entire atmosphere of the restaurant seemed to change without a single word being spoken. The room did not become quieter because anyone gave an order. It became quieter because everyone instinctively noticed the way those men looked at Adrian. They were dressed in perfectly tailored dark suits, each carrying himself with calm discipline rather than arrogance. The oldest among them walked directly toward our table before, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sir," he said softly, inclining his head, "we have been looking everywhere for you." Adrian sighed, almost imperceptibly. "I told everyone I wanted tonight to myself." "Yes, sir." The man hesitated before adding, "Your guests are waiting." Adrian glanced at the untouched birthday cake between us, then back at the man. "Tell them I will not be attending." Even I could see the surprise flash across the faces of the men standing behind him. None of them argued. None of them questioned his decision. They simply nodded in quiet obedience. "As you wish, sir." They turned and left as silently as they had arrived. The restaurant slowly returned to its cheerful conversations, but something had changed. "Melissa," Our hostess walked over carrying a coffee pot she clearly did not need. Grace, she whispered the moment Adrian looked away. Who exactly is your friend? I laughed nervously. I met him less than an hour ago. Those people called him sir like he owned half the city. I shrugged. Maybe he owns a company. Melissa looked unconvinced but hurried back to work before another customer waved her over. I turned toward Adrian. Your friends seem very worried about you. He smiled faintly. They worry too much. You must have an important job. For the first time that evening, he answered my question with another question. Would it change this conversation if I did? I thought about it honestly before shaking my head. Not really. You are still the man who almost spent his birthday alone. He stared at me for several silent seconds. There was no amusement in his expression anymore. Only genuine curiosity. Most people ask what I do before they ask who I am. I lifted one shoulder with a small smile. Jobs can change. Character usually does not. Adrian looked down at the extinguished birthday candle resting beside his plate. My mother used to say something very similar. There was such unexpected warmth in his voice that I found myself smiling without realizing it. Before either of us spoke again, my phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. I excused myself and answered immediately. Soit fart. Lily's cheerful voice filled my ear. Mom, Grandma said I could stay awake until you get home because I made something for you. Really? I asked, laughing softly. What did you make? It is a surprise. But you have to come home before I fall asleep. I promise. After hanging up, I noticed Adrian watching me with a gentle expression. Your daughter? He asked. I nodded proudly. Lily. She is 8. She thinks every problem in the world can be solved with glitter and cookies. Adrian smiled, this time more openly than before. She sounds wiser than many adults I have met. The sincerity in his voice made me laugh. Do you have children? His smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful silence that lingered for several moments. Finally, he answered quietly. No, it was only one word, but it carried the weight of something much larger. I did not press further. Some stories announced they were not ready to be told. As I stood to return to work, Adrian reached into his wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover the meal many times over. I immediately slid most of it back toward him. That is far too much. It is a thank you, he replied. I gently folded his fingers over the money and smiled. Then thank me by coming back another day. Just order dessert before someone else gives away your table. For a brief moment, the serious man with tattooed forearms laughed quietly to himself. And I had no idea that from that night forward, Romano's Family Grill would become the one place in Chicago where the most powerful man in the city hoped to be treated like someone completely ordinary. Some places become special not because of the food they serve, but because of the people who quietly change your heart while you are there. 3 days passed before I saw Adrian again. It was another busy evening at Romano's Family Grill. I was balancing a tray of iced tea when the front door opened. This time there was no birthday cake tucked beneath his arm, no heavy charcoal coat, and no group of men following behind him. He wore a simple navy sweater with dark jeans. The sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the familiar black tattoos winding across his forearms. He looked less like someone carrying the weight of a city and more like an ordinary man stopping by after work. The moment he saw me, that small, reserved smile returned. Good evening, Grace. Welcome back, I answered. You made it before we ran out of tables. He laughed quietly. I learned my lesson. I led him to a booth near the window, the same corner where soft afternoon light lingered even after sunset. As I handed him a menu, he looked around the restaurant with genuine appreciation. It feels different today. Different how? I asked. Warmer. I smiled. That is because Mrs. Romano insists every customer should feel like family before dessert arrives. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. She sounds like a remarkable woman. During the next hour, I checked on his table between serving other guests. He ordered the homemade lasagna, complimented the chef through me, and patiently waited while I rushed from one family to another. Unlike many customers, he never waved me over or demanded attention. Somehow, he always seemed to know exactly when I had a free moment. Just before closing time, he placed a small gift bag on the edge of the table. This is for Lily. I looked at it without touching it. Adrian, it is only a children's astronomy book. You mentioned she loves the stars. His voice remained gentle, almost hesitant. I happened to see it in a bookstore. I slowly pushed the bag back toward him with both hands. That is thoughtful, but I cannot accept it. He looked genuinely confused. Why? Because if you keep bringing gifts every time you visit, one day Lily may believe kindness always comes with expensive surprises. I want her to believe kindness begins with time, honesty, and showing up for people. Adrian remained silent for several moments, studying my face as though trying to understand something completely unfamiliar. You think I'm trying to buy gratitude? I shook my head immediately. No, I think you're trying to express appreciation the way your world taught you. Mine works a little differently. The restaurant had nearly emptied, leaving only the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Adrian slowly picked up the gift bag again. Then, teach me your way. His answer caught me completely off guard. There was no pride in his voice. No offense. Only quiet sincerity. I smiled warmly. Come back next week. Tell Lily one of your favorite childhood stories. That would mean much more than any present. For the first time since I had met him, Adrian looked genuinely speechless. Finally, he gave one slow nod. I do not remember the last time someone asked me to bring a story instead of money. As he stood to leave, he paused beside the booth and looked back at me. Grace, yes. Thank you for treating me like I am simply another customer. I smiled without hesitation. Because you are. Adrian walked out into the cool Chicago evening, carrying the unopened gift bag in one hand. And somewhere deep inside, a man who had spent years measuring loyalty with wealth began discovering that the rarest thing in the world could not be purchased at all. The strongest people are often the ones who never need to remind anyone of their strength. The following Tuesday evening arrived with the familiar scent of tomato sauce, fresh basil, and warm bread filling every corner of Romano's family grill. I had barely tied my apron when Melissa leaned across the hostess stand with a teasing smile. Your regular is here. I looked toward the entrance and immediately saw Adrian walking inside with the same calm expression he always carried. This time he held no gift bag, no flowers, and no expensive surprises. Instead, tucked beneath one arm was a worn hardcover children's book with faded corners. As he reached my station, he lifted it slightly with an almost shy smile. I believe I was instructed to bring a story instead. I laughed before I could stop myself. Then I suppose you follow directions perfectly. I am trying. There was something unexpectedly genuine about those words. He settled into his usual booth while I hurried through the dinner rush. Nearly an hour later, after the busiest wave of customers had finally slowed, the front door opened again. A luxury sedan had just stopped outside, and a well-dressed couple entered with confident smiles. The man wore an expensive tailored suit and spoke loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. I requested the best table in advance. Melissa checked the reservation list with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, sir. There does not seem to be a reservation under your name. His smile disappeared instantly. Do you know who I am? Melissa remained polite. I apologize, but every table is currently occupied. His eyes wandered across the dining room before landing on Adrian's booth. Then ask that gentleman to move. I have business associates arriving. Before Melissa could answer, I stepped forward. I'm sorry, sir, but everyone here arrived in order. We cannot ask another guest to give up his table. The man looked directly at me, clearly irritated. Young lady, perhaps you should worry less about rules and more about recognizing successful people. The restaurant grew noticeably quieter. Conversation slowed. Several nearby customers looked down at their plates, pretending not to hear. I felt my cheeks grow warm, but kept my voice calm. Every guest deserves the same respect while they are here. He let out a short laugh that carried no kindness. Easy for someone in your position to say. Before I could respond, Adrian quietly stood from his booth. There was no anger on his face, no raised voice. He simply walked toward us with the same measured confidence he carried everywhere. She is correct, he said evenly. Respect does not depend on the price of a suit or the size of a bank account. The businessman turned toward him with obvious impatience. This does not concern you. Adrian smiled politely. Actually, it does. Because tonight she defended my place at this table exactly as she would defend yours. The room remained completely silent. Adrian reached into his jacket, removed a business card, and handed it to the man without another word. The businessman glanced down for only a second before every trace of confidence disappeared from his face. His expression shifted from irritation to genuine embarrassment. He slowly slipped the card into his pocket and looked back at me. "Miss, I owe you an apology. You handled the situation with far more professionalism than I deserved." I nodded politely. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Without another argument, he quietly asked Melissa if any later reservation had been canceled and accepted the next available table. As the conversations around the restaurant gradually resumed, Adrian returned to his booth as though nothing unusual had happened. When I brought him fresh coffee a few minutes later, I smiled and whispered, "You could have embarrassed him." Adrian looked out the window at the Chicago lights before answering softly, "Grace, dignity is never proven by making someone feel smaller. It is proven by giving them the chance to become better." In that moment, I realized the most powerful thing about Adrian was not the respect he commanded when he entered a room. It was the kindness he chose when everyone expected something else. The truth has a way of arriving quietly, usually on the day you finally stop looking for it. Nearly a week passed after the evening Adrian defended my dignity with nothing more than calm words and quiet confidence. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. I worked double shifts, hurried home to help Lily finish her homework, and listened to her excited stories about planets, dinosaurs, and the newest library books she insisted we read together before bed. Adrian kept his promise as well. He returned to Romano's family grill once or twice each week, always carrying nothing more than a story. Sometimes he told me about fishing with his grandfather when he was a little boy. Other times he laughed while describing the old neighborhood bakery where he used to spend every Saturday morning before life became complicated. He never spoke about business. He never spoke about money. Most importantly, he never asked me for anything. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Lily finally met him. She had been waiting at the restaurant while I finished my shift, coloring pictures at a corner booth with Mrs. Romano. Adrian walked in carrying the same worn children's book. Lily looked up with curious blue eyes. "Are you the birthday man?" she asked with complete seriousness. I covered my face, embarrassed. "Lily," Adrian laughed warmly. "I believe that is a very accurate description." Within minutes, they were sitting together, reading aloud about astronauts exploring distant galaxies. Watching the two of them laugh together felt strangely natural, almost as though they had known each other far longer than a few minutes. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged the book against her chest. "Thank you for the story." Adrian smiled. "You may keep the book." She immediately looked toward me instead of accepting it. "Mom." I nodded gently. "Books are meant to be shared." Lily hugged Adrian without hesitation before skipping toward the car. I noticed genuine surprise cross his face. "Children trust very easily," he said quietly after she left. "Only when they feel safe," I answered. He lowered his eyes for a moment, almost as though those words meant more to him than I intended. 2 evenings later, everything changed. I had just finished clearing the last dinner plates when Melissa rushed into the kitchen holding her phone. "Grace," she whispered urgently, "you need to see this." A local news report filled the screen. Cameras surrounded the entrance of a downtown office building while reporters discussed one of the city's most influential businessmen, Adrian Russo. They spoke about his vast business empire, his charitable foundation, and the extraordinary influence he carried throughout Chicago. Then the camera captured him stepping out of a black vehicle wearing a tailored suit, accompanied by the same disciplined men who had quietly appeared at the restaurant on his birthday. The tattoos beneath his sleeves were unmistakable. My heart seemed to stop for a second. Adrian Russo. The name echoed through the restaurant as customers quietly watched the television. Mrs. Romano looked at me with gentle concern. "Grace, did you know?" I slowly shook my head. Everything suddenly made sense. The respectful men, the business card, the effortless authority. He had never lied to me. He had simply never told me who he really was. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat alone in my apartment, staring through the window at the lights of Chicago. I replayed every conversation we had shared, searching for signs I should have noticed sooner. There were none. He had always treated me with honesty and respect. Yet the truth frightened me all the same. His world was built on influence, responsibility, and dangers I could barely imagine. Mine revolved around school lunches, bedtime stories, and making sure the electricity bill was paid on time. As dawn approached, I quietly reached a decision that broke my own heart before I ever spoke the words. The next time Adrian walked through the doors of Romano's family grill, I would thank him for his kindness, return the children's book, and ask him not to come back. Not because I doubted the man he had shown me, but because I loved my daughter too much to let two completely different worlds collide. The hardest goodbye is the one you believe will protect the people you love. I spent the next 2 days rehearsing words that never sounded right. Every version ended the same way. Thank you. Goodbye. Please do not come back. Yet every time I imagined Adrian quietly nodding and walking away, something inside me refused to accept it. Still, being a mother meant choosing Lily's safety before my own happiness. Friday evening arrived with a cold autumn wind sweeping through the streets of Chicago. Romano's family grill filled quickly with families escaping the chilly weather, and I kept glancing toward the front door more often than I wanted to admit. At exactly 6:30, Adrian walked in carrying nothing but the familiar smile that somehow made the entire restaurant feel calmer. When our eyes met, he immediately sensed something was different. "Grace," he said softly, "may we talk when you have a moment?" I nodded without speaking. Nearly an hour later, after the dinner rush slowed, we stepped outside behind the restaurant where warm light spilled from the kitchen windows onto the quiet alley. The city sounded distant there, softened by the evening breeze. I wrapped my sweater more tightly around myself before finally finding the courage to speak. "I know who you are." Adrian remained silent. There was no surprise on his face, only quiet understanding. The news told me everything. He lowered his eyes briefly. "Not everything. Enough." My voice trembled despite every attempt to stay calm. "You belong to a world I cannot understand, Adrian. Lily deserves a simple life. She deserves birthday parties, school plays, and ordinary mornings. I cannot risk bringing anything complicated into her future." He listened without interrupting. When I finished, several long seconds passed between us. Finally, he spoke in the calm voice I'd come to trust. "Do you know why I never told you my last name?" I slowly shook my head. "Because I wanted at least one place where people looked at me before they looked at my reputation." His words settled heavily in the quiet night air. Everywhere I go, people stand before I enter the room. They agree before I finish speaking. They remember my position, but forget my birthday. Then one evening a waitress gave away her own dinner table without asking who I was. She placed one small candle on a cake and wished me a happy birthday, as though I were simply another lonely customer. He smiled sadly. "Grace, you gave me something no amount of influence ever could." I looked away, blinking back unexpected tears. Adrian continued quietly. "You are trying to protect Lily. I respect that more than you know. I would never ask you to choose between your daughter and me." He reached into his coat pocket and removed the worn children's astronomy book Lily loved so much. Inside the front cover, he had written only one sentence. "Thank you for letting me remember who I was before the world decided who I should become." He gently placed the book into my hands. "This belongs with her." I looked up at him. "You are leaving?" He nodded once. "You asked for an ordinary life. I will not stand in the way of it." For the first time since we met, I realized the strongest thing Adrian Russo had ever done was not protecting me, defending me, or commanding the respect of powerful people. It was accepting heartbreak without trying to change my mind. He gave me one final smile, warm but undeniably sad, before turning toward the waiting black car across the street. I stood frozen beneath the restaurant lights, clutching the little book against my chest as he quietly disappeared into the Chicago night. And only after the car was gone did I finally understand that the empty seat across from me suddenly felt far lonelier than it ever had before. Sometimes love does not return by knocking on the front door. Sometimes it quietly waits until you are ready to open your own heart again. Nearly 4 months passed after Adrian walked away from Romano's family grill. Winter slowly surrendered to the first gentle signs of spring, and life settled into the ordinary rhythm I had wanted so desperately to protect. Lily continued filling our tiny apartment with drawings of planets and constellations. I worked every extra shift I could find, saving every dollar with one impossible dream tucked away in the corner of my heart. Someday, I wanted to open a little neighborhood cafe where families could gather, children could read books, and nobody would ever be turned away because life had been unkind to them. It was only a dream, but dreams had carried me through harder seasons than this. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Romano called me into her office after lunch service. She smiled warmly and slid a folder across the desk. "Grace," she said, "I have something that may change your life." Inside was an application for a vacant storefront only 3 blocks away. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and a local community business program had approved a small startup grant for first-time restaurant owners. I stared at the papers in disbelief. How did this happen? Mrs. Romano shrugged with a smile. "Someone who believes in hard-working single parents recommended your name months ago. They never asked for recognition. They only asked us to judge your business plan fairly." My heart immediately thought of Adrian, but I forced myself to dismiss the idea. He had promised to respect my wishes, and he always kept his promises. Besides, nothing in the paperwork mentioned him. Every approval came from legitimate community organizations, experienced restaurant owners, and local business mentors who had independently reviewed my proposal. Over the following weeks, everything happened almost faster than I could believe. Volunteers painted the walls. Mrs. Romano introduced me to trusted suppliers who offered fair prices. A retired baker agreed to teach me family recipes without asking for anything in return except the promise that I would one day help someone else. Every person I met seemed connected only by simple kindness. There were no expensive gifts, no mysterious envelopes, no shortcuts, only opportunities one still had to earn through long days and even longer nights. On opening day, Lily stood proudly beside the front door, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked with Grandma that morning. "Mom," she whispered, "I think this is the happiest place I have ever seen." Tears filled my eyes as I looked around the cozy dining room. Wooden tables, soft lights, bookshelves filled with children's stories, and a small reading corner by the fireplace had become everything I once imagined during those exhausting late-night shifts. Just before we unlocked the front door, Mrs. Romano handed me a sealed envelope. "This arrived weeks ago," she said quietly. "The sender asked me to wait until today." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a simple handwritten note in Adrian's unmistakable handwriting. "Grace, if this cafe succeeds, it will be because you earned every customer who walks through that door. I did not build your dream. I only stepped aside so the right people could see it. Thank you for reminding me that helping someone does not always mean standing beside them. Sometimes it means believing in them from a respectful distance." I read the letter twice before carefully folding it back into the envelope. There was no address, no phone number, no request to meet again. Only quiet encouragement from someone who had kept every promise he ever made. As our first customers began filling the little cafe with laughter and conversation, I found myself looking toward the empty table beside the front window, wondering whether some promises were never truly meant to end, only to wait patiently until 2 hearts found the courage to meet again. One empty chair can become the place where an entire future quietly begins. A full year passed, and autumn returned to Chicago with crisp air, golden leaves, and the comforting smell of cinnamon drifting from the ovens inside my little cafe. Every table was filled with families sharing meals, children reading books from the shelves, and neighbors greeting one another as though they had known each other forever. Lily, now 9 years old, proudly helped carry warm cookies to customers, carefully repeating every lesson Mrs. Romano had taught her about kindness and hospitality. Looking around the room, I realized my dream had never been about owning a business. It had always been about creating a place where nobody felt invisible. As I reviewed the reservations for the evening, One small card resting on the front desk caught my attention. It had no customer name written on it. Instead, in careful handwriting, it simply read, "Reserved forever." My heart skipped. I knew those words before I even understood why. I quietly carried the card to the small table beside the front window, the same place where everything had begun 1 year earlier. I placed a single white candle in the center, just as I had done on that unforgettable birthday. As the evening crowd settled in, the cafe door opened softly. Adrian stepped inside wearing a simple charcoal sweater beneath a dark jacket, his familiar tattoos visible beneath neatly rolled sleeves. He looked around the room with the same quiet curiosity he had shown the first time he entered Romano's family grill. Our eyes met across the cafe, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then Lily spotted him first. "Birthday man," she called happily before running across the room. Adrian laughed with genuine surprise as she wrapped her arms around him in a joyful hug. "I think you've grown taller," he said warmly. "Only because I eat more cookies now," Lily replied proudly. I walked toward them, carrying the little reservation card in my hands. Adrian looked down at it before meeting my eyes again. "You remembered." I smiled softly. Some birthdays deserve a second chance. He followed me to the window table and gently touched the back of the chair that had been waiting for him. "You saved this seat for me." I nodded. "Not because of who you are, because of who you were the night you sat here alone." Adrian remained silent, emotion quietly filling his blue eyes. "Grace," he said at last. "I stayed away because I believed. Loving someone sometimes means respecting the distance they ask for." I reached across the table and took his hand. And I finally learned that protecting Lily does not mean pushing away every good person who walks into our lives. The little white candle flickered gently between us. Adrian smiled with the same quiet warmth I had first seen 1 year ago. "May I celebrate this birthday with both of you?" Lily answered before I could speak. "Only if you promise never to eat alone again." We all laughed, and something inside me that had been quietly waiting for a year finally found peace. As the cafe lights glowed against the autumn evening, Adrian stood and stepped beside me. He gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from my face, silently asking permission with his eyes. I smiled, and he leaned forward to place a soft, respectful kiss on my forehead before our lips met in a brief, tender kiss filled not with urgency, but with gratitude, trust, and hope. Around us, conversations continued, children laughed, and coffee cups clinked softly, yet the world somehow felt wonderfully still. Looking at Adrian beside me and Lily smiling across the table, I understood the greatest lesson life had ever given me. Power may open every door in the city, but only kindness can invite someone to stay. And sometimes the most unforgettable birthday gift is not the table you almost lost, but the family waiting across it when you finally come home.